Ban Yuan couldn't help but feel a sense of boredom as he stepped up for the academy's admission test. He was the very last student to be evaluated, and from the looks of it, the whole affair felt more like a formality than a real challenge. He'd seen monsters like these countless times before, and fighting them was practically second nature. His unique ability was a strange one. He grew stronger with every powerful foe he vanquished, even absorbing their attributes into his own being. He was still trying to get his bearings in this new dimension, a world where he had been summoned to attend a special academy. This school's entire purpose was to train the ultimate warriors, individuals strong enough to one day conquer the legendary Tower of Babel. The name of the tower tickled a distant memory from his childhood, a story from an old book, but the rules of this world were still a bit fuzzy to him. Shrugging off his confusion, he accepted the test. The battle was a blur. He moved through the monstrous opponents with an almost casual grace, dismantling them as if they were nothing more than training dummies. The moment he landed the final blow, the world dissolved around him, and he found himself teleported directly to the academy grounds. A quick glance told him he had only a few minutes to spare before the opening ceremony began. His sudden appearance caused a stir. Murmurs rippled through the assembled students, most of them shocked to see a new face after the admission deadline had officially passed. The initial surprise, however, quickly melted into derisive laughter when they got a better look at him. He was just a human. It was in that moment, under the weight of hundreds of condescending stares, that Ban realized the academy's student body was anything but human. He saw a kaleidoscope of different races, from elegant elves to brutish orcs, and everything in between. To make matters worse, his attribute-seeing eyes were working overtime, revealing the insane power levels of the students around him. Just as he was taking it all in, a small group of fellow humans waved him over. They informed him of the unspoken rule that the so-called lower races were expected to sit in the back. His spot, they explained, was already waiting for him among the inferiors. As Ban made his way to the designated area, he noticed something incredibly strange. The very students who were ostracized as the weakest in the academy possessed monstrous attributes. His eyes, which never lied, told him a story completely at odds with the school's social hierarchy. The quiet guy in the corner was a walking catastrophe. The girl with the unervingly sharp eyes was an absolute monster. And another one had stats that dwarfed everyone else in the vicinity. Up until this point, Ban had always considered himself the monster, the one with abnormal potential. Now, standing among these hidden titans, he understood that he had a long, long way to go before he could truly claim that title. He decided to introduce himself, starting with a girl named Rachel. She had a disarmingly cute appearance that he found himself instantly drawn to. Next, he turned to greet the girl with the intimidating gaze. Unlike Rachel, her eyes were sharp and analytical, and Ban could feel her curiosity directed at the artifact concealed on his arm. He revealed it without hesitation, introducing his conscious weapon, Ava. The girl's name was Dooko Yan, and she was the daughter of a renowned Murine master. This tidbit of information made Ban's mind race, and he blurted out a guess, asking if her fighting style involved martial arts and using ki to create explosions. His out-of-the-blue speculation caused a ripple of laughter among their small group. Dooko Yan herself blushed, admitting with a small smile that he wasn't entirely wrong. The blonde boy with them was introduced as Slight, and it seemed that he and Rachel were the only other actual humans in their little circle. Before they could get to know each other any better, a blinding light cut their conversation short. The ceiling high above them seemed to peel open, and a deafening sound echoed through the grand hall. Suddenly, the very air grew heavy, pressing down on everyone with an almost physical weight. It was an overwhelming pressure that stole the breath from their lungs and planted a seed of pure, primal terror in their hearts, especially for Rachel, Slight, and Ban. Yuan knew the immense pressure was emanating from the sky, from whatever had just been revealed, but he couldn't comprehend its source. This dramatic display marked the official beginning of the 257th admission ceremony for the Union Academy, and a booming voice congratulated all the new students. Later that day, the 4 special admission students found themselves gathered in Professor Yumina's office. She tried to break the ice, asking what they thought of the principal's speech, but her question was met with a thick, awkward silence. Yuan, ever the one to speak his mind, shattered the silence by asking if the giant eye they had seen was actually the principal. The look of genuine surprise on Professor Yumina's face was telling. Dooko Yan thought to herself how impressive it was that this newcomer had managed to see the principal at all, whose presence was usually veiled by powerful magic. Yamina confirmed his suspicion, explaining that the principal was an entity who rarely made a public appearance. She then turned her attention directly to Yuan, informing him that he had a private meeting scheduled with the principal later. Shifting her focus back to the group, she formally introduced herself as their dedicated professor for their special class over the next 5 years. Her message was simple and direct. Their success was a reflection of her own, so she expected them to give it their all. She warned them to be wary of the other students, as the regular classes often harbored envy and hostility towards the special admission students, seeing them as undeserving outsiders. She stressed the importance of sticking together, reminding them that from that day forward, they were a team, destined to climb the Tower of Babel side by side. To conclude the meeting, she announced a welcome gift from the academy. A soft light filled the room, and a necklace with a unique pendant materialized in each of their hands. Slight, examining the object, guessed it was a student ID. Yamina smiled and explained that it was much more than that. It served as their identification, a pass to all academy facilities, and a personal teleportation device. As if on cue, Slight fumbled with his pendant, and in the blink of an eye, he, Dooko Yan, and Rachel vanished and reappeared in the exact same spot, looking utterly bewildered. Yumina's smile widened as she added that the pendant was also their only key to entering the tower, so they should guard it with their lives. As the other three left her office, still reeling from the accidental teleportation, they wondered why Yuan had been asked to stay behind. Dooko Yan, with her keen perception, had a strong suspicion it was because he was the only one who had managed to look directly at the principal. The scene shifted to a quiet and imposing room, where Yuan sat hunched over in a chair that was uncomfortably large for him. His mind raced, convinced he must have done something terribly wrong to warrant a private audience with the principal. A powerful, ancient voice echoed from the shadows, addressing him by name. The principal told him to face him, assuring him there was nothing to fear since this was not his true form. Still intimidated, Yuan kept his gaze fixed on the floor. The calm voice spoke again, gently coaxing him to look up. Hesitantly, he lifted his head, and what he saw left him completely baffled. The Grand Principal's chair was empty. Instead, perched on the massive desk was a simple, unassuming rag doll. The voice was coming from it. Yuan, trying to regain his composure, asked if he should address the doll as principal or chancellor. The doll's reply was direct and to the point. He was to call it master. The master then explained the purpose of their meeting. He stated that he typically didn't meddle in the development of students, believing that the weak should be allowed to remain weak. His sole objective was to personally witness the one who would finally conquer the tower. Yuan absorbed this information silently. For the master, it was a grand spectacle, a form of entertainment. But for Yuan, the tower represented his family's legacy, a goal he was willing to die for. He wondered what it meant to everyone else, why so many different beings from so many worlds had gathered here with the same singular ambition. Breaking the silence, he looked at the rag doll and asked the most fundamental question of all, what exactly the tower was. After a brief pause, the doll revealed that the tower was a path to the divine, a form of judgment. The word divine echoed in Yuan's mind, and he grappled with whether it referred to gods or something else entirely. Before he could get lost in his thoughts, the master continued, declaring that he saw in Yuan the greatest potential he had encountered in centuries. Because of this, he was willing to make an exception to his long-held rule of non-interference. One of the doll's fabric arms pointed towards Yuan, and at that exact moment, the ID pendant in his pocket began to glow with an intense light. Startled, Yuan asked what was happening. The master explained that he had expanded Yuan's privileges, granting him unrestricted access to any dungeon outside the academy's walls, allowing him to hone his skills before taking on the tower. Yuan started to question what outside the academy meant, But his words were cut short as a swirling portal opened directly beneath his feet, pulling him down with an irresistible force. As he fought to maintain his balance, the master gave him one final instruction. If his progress proved to be remarkable, more privileges would be unlocked. Yuan yelled back, asking what kind of privileges, but he was already being consumed by the darkness. The last thing he heard was the doll's voice echoing in the void. The privilege of exploring the tower alone. The voice added that it would be waiting for his progress with great anticipation. The journey through the portal was instantaneous and utterly disorienting. Yuan tumbled out of the other side, landing on something surprisingly soft. A gentle voice asked him how his meeting with the principal went. Looking up, he found himself in the lap of a beautiful professor with flowers woven into her hair. He scrambled to his feet, his face beet red with embarrassment. She laughed at his reaction, explaining that the principal had a habit of dismissing his visitors in such an abrupt manner. She then took his ID to examine it, and her eyes widened in disbelief. She whispered that it was unbelievable the principal had granted a student permission to leave the academy. She went on to explain the immense opportunity he had been given, the freedom to explore dungeons and grow stronger without the school's rigid restrictions. It was only then that Yuan truly understood. This wasn't a punishment for being weak. It was a reward for his incredible potential. The professor sighed with a touch of envy. Then her expression brightened as she recommended he visit a city called Ronica, renowned for its stunning temple. Some time later, Yuan was walking down a long, stone-paved road, a massive city looming on the horizon. He smiled, remembering the professor's only request in exchange for the information. A bottle or two of the local alcohol as a souvenir. Felt like a fair trade. His thoughts drifted to the last conversation he had with his grandfather. In the memory, the old man handed him a small, heavy bag, asking if he was truly prepared. Inside, a pile of gleaming gold bars shone brightly. His grandfather had explained with a proud smile that gold held its value across all worlds, a legacy passed down from their ancestors. Before, carrying such a treasure would have been a dangerous burden, but with his inventory system, it was the perfect provision for his journey. He took out a few of the bars, feeling the weight of his family's heritage and the responsibility that came with it. Finally, he arrived at the gates of Ronica. The city was a breathtaking metropolis, a vibrant fusion of ancient, mystical architecture and fantastical technology. Flying cars and motorcycles zipped through the skies, and Yuan stared in open-mouthed awe. Lost in the spectacle, he was stopped by a pair of city guards. Their initial suspicion melted away into immediate respect the moment they spotted the academy's emblem on his shoulder. They snapped to a salute, explaining that the city's peace was maintained thanks to the protection of the academy and its chancellor. Realizing he was a newcomer, the guards offered their assistance with anything he might need. A mischievous grin spread across Yuan's face as he asked if they meant anything. He then pointed up at a sleek flying motorcycle as it streaked across the sky. His eyes shining with excitement, he declared that he wanted one of those and asked how much it cost. Far from the confines of the academy, Yuan was experiencing pure, unadulterated freedom. He tore through the skies around Ronica on his new flying motorcycle, pushing it to its limits across open fields and diving off cliffs just to feel the exhilarating rush of the wind. The purchase had been a spur-of-the-moment decision, but it was one he didn't regret in the slightest. When he'd asked the guards about the price, they had quoted him 250,000 ronis for a basic model. Having no concept of the local currency, Yuan had simply pulled out one of his gold bars and asked what it was worth. The guard's jaws had practically hit the floor. As he later found out, that single bar of gold was valued at over 7 million ronis. As he flew, his faithful snake-shaped weapon, Eve, materialized on his shoulder. He excitedly asked for her opinion on their new ride. He had infused the motorcycle with the concepts of demon and ghost, transforming it into a living artifact, a sister for Eve, which he aptly named Lilith. The two artifacts seemed to get along splendidly, and together, the trio explored the wonders of this new world. His return to the academy was a stark contrast to his recent freedom. He was nursing a splitting headache, slumped over a table while Slight glared at him furiously. Slight placed a glass of water in front of him, his disappointment palpable. He was angry because Yuan had simply vanished without a word after their first group meeting. Yuan apologized, blaming the flower-haired professor for insisting he join her for a drink. But Slight wasn't buying it. Dooko Yan, the white-haired girl, interrupted their tense exchange, pointing to a new emblem on Yuan's shirt. He explained, a bit sheepishly, that he had been appointed as the class president. Slight seemed to think it was a reasonable decision, but Dooko Yan immediately cut him off. She declared that she was the strongest, and therefore the position should rightfully be hers, her sharp eyes fixed on Yuan. Slight bristled at her arrogance, retorting that she always acted like she was better than everyone. The argument escalated when Dooko Yan revealed she knew about Slight's secret plan to attempt climbing the tower by himself. Caught completely off guard, the swordsman stuttered for a response, while Rachel watched the drama unfold with wide, curious eyes. Tired of the bickering and the pounding in his head, Yuan rested his head on the table. He mentally sized up his new team. Slight was a proud, somewhat ignorant lion. Dooko Yan was a fierce street cat, strong but quick to make enemies. And Rachel was like a docile puppy. With a heavy sigh, he raised his hand to get their attention. He argued that the class president didn't need to be the strongest. If that were the case, that person would just make all the decisions on their own. The true role of a leader, he explained, was to unite the group and bring them together. After a lengthy debate, Dooko Yan finally conceded. She stood up, looking Yuan up and down, and accepted the decision. But she made sure to get one last jab in, casting a sharp glance at Slight. She remarked that sometimes, to get what you want, you have to accept things you find unnecessary. As she walked away, Slight was practically vibrating with rage. Yuan was left wondering how on earth he was going to get these two proud individuals to cooperate. Taking advantage of the momentary peace, Rachel approached him, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. She asked him where the cute little white snake he had before had gone. Yuan's first test as a leader came sooner than he expected. During their first practical class, held in a training field alongside other classes, a student from Class 1 with a body made of solid rock began to openly challenge the professor. The atmosphere was already tense, as the regular students harbored a deep resentment for the special admission students and their preferential treatment. The crowd grew rowdy, with everyone eager for a chance to fight one of the special students. Yuan tried to maintain a clueless expression, but Slight knew this was coming. He was well aware of the animosity the other classes felt towards them. In the midst of the chaos, the stone-bodied student, whose name was Erector, spotted Professor Yumina's brooch pinned to Yuan's uniform, a clear symbol of his new status as class representative. Enraged at the sight of what he perceived as a weakling bearing such an honor, he bellowed, demanding to be the first to fight. The substitute professor, clearly enjoying the escalating rivalry, looked directly at Yuan. He then announced to the roaring crowd that Ban Yuan would be Erector's opponent. Meanwhile, back in her office, Professor Yamina was reading the joint class report in disbelief. A practical combat session between classes on the very first day, it was a ridiculously disproportionate and arrogant decision. She wondered which of her colleagues could have designed such a hostile curriculum. Back on the field, as the substitute professor formally announced the matchup, Yuan calmly raised his hand. With a charismatic and respectful smile, he tried to reason with the professor, explaining that his skills weren't really suited for direct combat. The professor just sneered, adjusting his glasses. He dismissed the excuse as nonsense and docked Yuan 3 points from his grade for making flimsy excuses. It was painfully obvious that the professor was determined to humiliate him. Thinking on his feet, Yuan tried a different tactic. He explained that he was accepted into the special admission program for his unique skills, which didn't involve fighting head-on. This attempt to sidestep the confrontation only served to further irritate the professor, who roared that he would not tolerate such disrespect. He docked Yuan another 5 points. Realizing he was out of options, Yuan raised his hand one last time. To everyone's surprise, he announced that he would fight. But, he added, he would need a week to prepare, guaranteeing he would be ready by then. His statement was met with a stunned silence, which quickly gave way to whispers and contemptuous laughter from the stands. To the other students, it sounded like the confession of a coward. A young woman in the crowd with blue hair and a witch's hat watched him skeptically, doubting he could achieve anything in just 7 days. The professor, however, saw this as a golden opportunity. A venomous smile spread across his face as he agreed. He declared that the fight between Ban Yuan and Erector was officially scheduled for 1 week from now. And to make sure everyone could witness the spectacle, it would be broadcast live on the Academy's website. It was exactly what he wanted. A public humiliation. Yuan stared at his opponent, the stone giant Erector, and activated his analytical eyes. The stats were brutal. Erector had 5 times his health and 10 times his physical strength. The difference was overwhelming. Yet, even as he processed the daunting numbers, a plan began to take shape in his mind. As he calculated his strategy, he noticed the worried looks from Slight and Rutschel. He knew he needed to get stronger and fast to even stand a chance against the monsters in this academy. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to Dooko Yan, who was stretching nonchalantly at the side of the field. She turned to face Class 1 and announced in a voice as cold as ice that if they wanted to see the skills of a special admission student, she would be happy to oblige. She declared that her specialty was combat and asked who wanted to be first. Yuan analyzed her stats and was floored. Her numbers were so absurdly high that his eyes could barely process them. She was a powerhouse, a double S-rank warrior. The arrogance of Class 1 evaporated in an instant. The crowd that had been baying for blood just moments before was now deathly silent. Tired of waiting, Dooko Yan pointed directly at Erector. With a predatory smile, she beckoned him forward with a single finger. She taunted him, calling him out as the one who had been barking the loudest, and promised to crush him. The stone giant froze, beads of sweat dripping down his rocky face. His plan had been to fight the seemingly weak newcomer, not this calamity in human form. Yuan realized that if that fight happened, Erector wouldn't be in any condition to face him in a week. Despite having zero sympathy for the guy, Yuan ran over to his classmate. He urged her not to fight him, explaining that Erector was his opponent for next week. Dooko Yan looked at him, surprised, and said she was just trying to defend him. He thanked her for her concern but stated with unwavering conviction that he needed to prove his own worth with his own 2 hands, asking for her understanding. An intrigued smile played on her lips. She admitted that she had initially thought he was just a guy with a few clever tricks up his sleeve, but perhaps she had been mistaken. Satisfied with his resolve, she turned back to the crowd one last time, asking if anyone else wanted a fight. Every student avoided her gaze. She scoffed at their cowardice, comparing them to rabid dogs who bark loudly but run with their tails between their legs when the cage door opens. While Yuan and the others breathed a collective sigh of relief, her words had inflamed the hatred of the regular students. From the stands, a new voice, powerful and arrogant, echoed across the field. A blond man with imposing horns and an overwhelming aura of power descended towards the arena. He sneered, calling Dooko Yan a dog and remarking that it was always the weak who traveled in packs for protection. He found the sight pathetic. Dooko Yan's attention shifted entirely to this new challenger, and a new, far more dangerous confrontation was about to begin. The horned man carried himself with a palpable arrogance, absolutely certain that no one in the arena could stand up to him. But Yuan's eyes saw more than just confidence. They saw a level of power that was in a completely different league, even when compared to the other prodigies in the academy. Yuan asked who he was, and Slight answered with a tense voice, identifying him as Ortima, regent of the Katui's dimension. He explained that Ortima belonged to one of the 10 great families that ruled the highest-ranking dimensions. As Ortima descended from the stands, even his own companions seemed nervous. He approached the substitute professor and demanded that the fight be made official. The professor, a malicious grin spreading across his face, pulled out a recording device. Slight explained that he was planning to stream the entire confrontation on the Academy's internet. To Slight's surprise, Yuan not only understood what the internet was, but also pulled a device from his own inventory and accessed the Academy's channel. Rachel and Slight huddled around him, amazed as they watched the screen. The live feed showed the professor's smug face. His intention to publicly humiliate the special admission group was crystal clear. But Yuan looked at Dooko Yan, who was already standing in the center of the arena, and knew things were not going to go according to the professor's plan. The two combatants faced each other, their powerful auras already distorting the air around them. Ortima, with a look of pure disdain, told her to make the first move. Dooko Yan responded with a dismissive hand gesture, informing him that since he was the newcomer, she would grant him the honor of the first attack. Insulted by her nonchalance, Ortima raised his hand, and his voice boomed with power as he commanded her to kneel. A tsunami of invisible force erupted from him, a crushing pressure that didn't just target Dooko Yan, but swept across the entire arena. In the stands, students were thrown from their seats. Slight felt the air being violently ripped from his lungs, the pressure threatening to crush him. Rachel, terrified, grabbed onto Yuan's arm, trembling uncontrollably. Yuan murmured that Ortima was distorting the very laws of nature, and Slight stared at him, shocked that he could perceive such a complex phenomenon. But at the epicenter of it all, Dooko Yan remained perfectly still, completely unfazed. A dark, menacing aura, a bloodlust so potent it felt like sharp glass in the air, erupted from her. With a simple, elegant wave of her hand, she dissipated Ortima's immense pressure as if it were nothing more than a gentle breeze. The professor's jaw dropped. Ortima's entourage was left speechless. Even Yuan, who knew she was strong, realized that her power was far greater than he had initially measured. She retorted with an icy voice that his power was as ridiculous as the horns on his head. In the blink of an eye, she vanished and reappeared directly in front of Ortima, delivering a devastating kick to his torso. Caught by surprise, he barely managed to raise his arms to block the blow. The impact sent him skidding backward. She warned him that she wouldn't fall for the same trick twice, and then the hunt began. What followed was nothing short of a massacre. Dooko Yan moved like a shadow, her actions fluid and lethal. Her attacks were a dizzying blur of punches and kicks that Ortima, who was used to overwhelming his opponents with raw power, simply couldn't keep up with. He tried to counterattack, but his movements were clumsy and predictable. She dodged his desperate swings with ease, responding with a clean, powerful kick to his chin that sent him staggering. Slight whispered in disbelief that she was completely dominating a regent. Yuan watched the entire exchange not with surprise, but with a cold, analytical eye. He noted that Ortima's ability suppressed his opponent's movements, but it had no effect on her. He was clearly not used to physical combat. Slight turned to him, impressed by his ability to pick up on such fine details in the midst of the frantic battle. Ortima grew more humiliated with every blow he failed to land. Dooko Yan taunted him, asking if all he could do was run his mouth as she gracefully evaded another of his swings. Pushed to his absolute limit, Ortima's reason finally shattered. With a scream of pure, unadulterated fury, he unleashed his entire aura. His eyes glowed with a fiery intensity. He roared that he would make her pay for this insult with her life, as a storm of energy exploded around him. Faced with this tempest of power and hatred, Dooko Yan simply stared back at him with the same cold, challenging expression, ready for whatever came next. She calmly remarked that life was a concept someone like him shouldn't discuss so lightly, as her own menacing aura began to condense, preparing for a decisive counterattack. Just as she was about to move in for the final blow, she was interrupted by the sound of clapping echoing through the arena. Professor Yamaina had entered the battlefield. With her mere presence, the hostile auras of both fighters dissipated, and a vast field of vibrant flowers magically sprouted from the stone floor, filling the air with the sweet scent of spring. The two combatants, stunned by the sudden change, watched as petals floated around them. With a serene smile that held an undeniable weight of authority, Yamaina scolded them, reminding them that the Academy did not encourage unnecessary fights and that they should save their strength for the tower. Furious and utterly humiliated, Ortima clenched his teeth, turned his back, and stormed away without another word. Dooko Yan commented with a rare tone of admiration that the professor was very strong. Pleased by the compliment, Yamina smiled, and Dooko Yan returned to her group. She asked Yuan what he thought of the fight. He replied that simply watching it had been a great help, but his sentence was cut short by a sudden impact from behind. Startled, he turned to find Rachel, who was still trembling with fear, using him as a shield to hide from Dooko Yan. He gently calmed her down while the white-haired warrior watched them, seemingly oblivious to the panic her intense aura was causing. Still on the field, Yamina was publicly reprimanding the substitute professor, making it clear that his behavior was unacceptable and that a simple apology would not suffice. Then, she gracefully walked over to Yuan, pointed to the representative's pin on his chest, and with a delicate flick, adjusted it. She winked at him, telling him that dignity was paramount for a class representative. This casual and intimate gesture sent a wave of envious and furious glares from all the male students in the vicinity. Yuan sighed. Instead of helping the situation, the professor had just added more fuel to the fire. In the aftermath of the battle, gossip spread through the academy like wildfire. The video that the substitute professor had posted to humiliate them had backfired spectacularly. The recording clearly showed Dooko Yan's complete and utter domination over Ortama, and the comment section exploded. Soon, two figures became the academy's main topic of conversation. Dooko Yan, now dubbed the Silver Queen, and Yuan, the Master of Bargaining, who had cleverly negotiated a week to prepare for his own fight. His brief interaction with Professor Yamina at the end of the video only fueled more speculation, and the special admission students were suddenly the biggest celebrities on campus. Reading through the comments with his group, Yuan couldn't help but laugh. Beside him, Slight was completely lost, trying to decipher the internet slang. Dooko Yan nonchalantly remarked that it wasn't surprising they were the talk of the academy, before dropping a bombshell. She revealed that Ortama wasn't even the strongest student in his class. She recalled the blue-haired girl with the witch's hat, stating that there was at least one other person in that class more capable than him. Yuan admitted he hadn't noticed, as he had been too focused on her fight. Their conversation was interrupted when they noticed Rachel sitting by herself, still visibly terrified of Dooko Yan and unable to bring herself to get close to her. Seeing that this situation was unsustainable, especially since the two were roommates, Yuan decided to intervene. He opened his inventory and pulled out a glass jar. He thought he knew just how to solve this problem. Inside the jar was a special elixir jelly. The moment he opened it, an incredibly sweet and inviting aroma filled the air. Rachel's head snapped up, her eyes immediately locking onto the jar. Yuan spread the golden jelly on a piece of bread and offered it to the group. Slight and Dooko Yan each took a bite, and their eyes widened in surprise. Slight exclaimed that it was delicious, and even Dooko Yan's icy demeanor melted for a moment. She stammered that it was amazing, a rare smile gracing her lips. Yuan then turned to Rachel, who was practically drooling, and invited her to join them. Hesitantly, she approached and accepted a piece of bread. As she took the first bite, her eyes filled with pure, unadulterated happiness. The delicate flavor and the calming properties of the elixir began to soothe her fears. As Rachel savored her treat, Yuan handed another piece to Dooko Yan, casually telling her to consider it a favor. At the word favor, Dooko Yan's expression shifted. She stood up, a sudden determination in her eyes. Before Yuan could react, she grabbed him by the tie, pulling him close while he was still holding a piece of bread midair. In exchange for the jelly, she announced with a surprising seriousness, she would give him a private martial arts lesson. Before he could even respond, the world around him dissolved. They were suddenly in a Spartan training room, a mental space that reflected her focused and disciplined mind. Dooko Yan picked up a wooden sword. She warned him not to move carelessly, and with a simple swing, the blade sliced through the air, creating a small gust of wind. She settled into a battle stance, and in the next instant, an intense pressure emanated from her. She charged forward, her movement a blur. It was a perfect thrust, so fast that it pushed the air in front of it, stopping the tip of the sword just millimeters from Yuan's nose. He stared at her with a blank expression, his mind trying to process what had just happened. She explained that this was a thrust, a strike delivered without a single hint of doubt or hesitation. For Yuan, it was hard to fathom that a human could execute a move with such flawless perfection. But in that brief moment, his unique power did more than just observe, it learned. A new concept crystallized in his mind: penetration. As he got lost in thought, trying to understand the specifics of this new concept, Dooko Yan called him back to reality. She told him to focus, explaining that a thrust wasn't limited to a single form. She began to execute a series of strikes, each one subtly different from the last. She explained the countless variables. How many times to thrust, with what force, what to imitate. But the ultimate foundation, she revealed, was a single, perfect thrust that needed no repetition. Her words, born from a mastery of a concept in its purest form, carried the undeniable weight of truth. She handed him the sword, telling him it was his turn. Holding the wooden weapon, Yuan asked her not to laugh at his attempt. She smiled, replying that if he managed to copy her perfectly on his first try, her 10 years of dedicated training would have been for nothing. He moved, mimicking the stance and the strike she had demonstrated. The moment his thrust cut through the air, Dooko Yan's smile vanished. She was in disbelief. He had somehow grasped the very essence of the strike after seeing it just once. But Yuan wasn't satisfied. He felt that something was missing. Until now, his power had focused on mixing and combining various concepts. But her lesson made him realize his fundamental mistake. He needed to strengthen and deepen one concept at a time. He took off his shirt for better freedom of movement and concentrated. He repeated the movement, pondering why the concept he learned was penetration. The answer hit him like a lightning bolt. It was because the original user, Dooko Yan, believed with every fiber of her being that the true essence of a thrust was to penetrate the target. With this newfound understanding, he channeled all his focus, power, and conviction into a single attack. The result was dramatically different. The strike was immensely more powerful, as if he and the sword had become the very embodiment of the concept of a thrust. "Stop!" she ordered, seeing the immense effort drain him. He collapsed to his knees, panting, as a flood of system notifications filled his vision. A martial arts concept had been learned, and the swordsman concept had been absorbed as a subconcept. He checked his stats and his jaw dropped. His attributes had skyrocketed. The swordsman concept, which had barely progressed before, had risen drastically, and his combat skills had literally doubled. Dooko Yan murmured, impressed, that she never thought she could lose in this way. Embarrassed, Yuan scratched his head, saying he was just imitating her and had only learned so quickly because she was such a great teacher. The compliment caught her off guard, and she turned her face away to hide a slight blush. Satisfied, Yuan thanked her and offered her an elixir as payment. She told him that a single elixir wasn't enough to cover the lesson, and he tensed, unsure of what else he could possibly offer. Seeing his concern, she smiled. With a playful glint in her eyes, she assured him not to worry. She would get her compensation over time and told him to be prepared. With the mood completely transformed, she reminded him of their next class, and they teleported out of the training space. Yuan was still pondering her enigmatic smile when the scene shifted. In the academy hallways, Rachel and Slight were walking together, distracted by something on a phone. Suddenly, Rachel bumped into a group of students from another class. They had hostile glares and threatening auras. The leader of the group slammed his hand against the wall, blocking her path. With a sneer, he asked where she thought she was going. The bully continued to block her way, but Rachel, though clearly annoyed, refused to be intimidated. Slight, seeing the confrontation, immediately stepped between them. He asked in a voice as cold as ice what they wanted with his classmate. The aggressor glared at him, irritated, and told him to get out of the way. At that exact moment, Yuan and Dooko Yan teleported into the hallway. The sudden arrival of the now famous Silver Queen changed the dynamic completely. Recognizing the warrior who had humiliated Ortima, the group of bullies instantly backed down and scurried away, but not before muttering a veiled threat. This time, Rachel hid behind Slight, thanking him for his protection. Yuan noticed the restrained fury simmering in his friend's eyes. This was far from over. Moments later, in their classroom, an elderly professor was lecturing on the history of the Union. But for the group of bullies, the class was just another opportunity to continue their harassment. They discreetly started taking pictures of Rachel, whispering malicious comments among themselves. The young woman tried to ignore them, but her sadness and discomfort were palpable. Both Slight and Yuan felt their anger begin to boil. Yuan thought to himself that it didn't matter which world he was in, human wickedness was a constant. Unable to contain his rage any longer, Slight abruptly stood up, catching the professor's attention. He announced that some students were disrupting the class. The old professor simply asked for silence and, without giving it much thought, resumed his lecture. The bullies, seeing this, mocked Slight under their breath, calling him naive and accusing him of trying to show off. Their provocations escalated when they asked if he and Rachel were dating. That was the final straw. Silent tears began to stream down Rachel's face. With a sharp snap, Slight broke the pencil in his hand, ready to explode. But before he could get up, a firm hand landed on his shoulder. It was Yuan. He whispered for him to calm down. Slight replied in disbelief, but Yuan explained that causing a scene would only make things worse. He showed Slight his phone screen, telling him to just watch. On the screen, a live stream on UnionTuber was active. Slight understood instantly, and a malicious smile spread across his face. He turned to the bullies and said loudly for them to please keep laughing, as the audience was loving it. Confused, the bullies looked around but saw nothing out of the ordinary. What they didn't know was that right behind them, Yuan's little snake, Eve, was holding a camera in her mouth, recording every single word and every laugh since the harassment began. In seconds, the live stream's comment section exploded with hundreds of messages expressing outrage. Dooko Yan quietly commented to Yuan that it was a great initiative. He simply replied that they had messed with one of their own, and they weren't going to get away with it. By the time the three bullies finally realized what was happening, it was too late. They tried to hide their faces and desperately searched for the camera until one of them spotted the small white snake. But before they could do anything, Eve vanished in the blink of an eye. The commotion finally caught the professor's full attention, and this time he lost his patience. He demanded their names and ordered them out of his classroom. As they were being kicked out, the professor grumbled that he would be giving them low grades for their behavior. Yuan thought the punishment was too light, but Rachel, looking much more relieved, disagreed. She said it was enough and thanked her friends with a genuine smile, telling them she was okay because of them. The moment of gratitude brought the group closer together. Even Dooko Yan showed a rare, subtle smile. They all agreed that things had become easier with Yuan as their class president. But their peace was short-lived. After class, the three expelled bullies were waiting for them in the hallway. Scared, Rachel hid behind Yuan. The group's irritation returned with a vengeance. This time, the aggressors weren't empty-handed. They were armed. Facing the weapons pointed at them, Slight took a step forward, a dangerous calm settling over him as he asked what they wanted. Facing the three armed bullies, Slight remained completely unfazed. Their leader demanded an explanation for the humiliation of being recorded, which he claimed had ruined their grades. Yuan glanced over and noticed the substitute professor watching from a distance, doing absolutely nothing, even as he saw his students draw their weapons. It was a clear display of contempt for those from the lower dimensions. The shouting started again, but Slight, with a frighteningly calm demeanor, just stared at them and uttered a single word, "Barbarians." The insult was the trigger. The leader lunged forward, his sword aimed at Slight's chest, screaming at him to repeat what he had said. In response, Slight unsheathed his own sword. With a casual, almost careless motion, a fan of golden light sliced through the air. The bully's sword split in two, the blade flying off into the distance. The shock was absolute. Slight's fury exploded, and the golden aura around his sword intensified. Before he could do anything, he felt a flick on his cheek. It was Dooko Yan. With a simple touch, she dispelled Slight's aura, bringing him back to his senses. Stunned, he made his sword disappear. The professor, realizing he had lost control of the situation, quickly left, muttering to himself. Dooko Yan scolded Slight, and Yuan realized that the golden sword seemed to have a strange effect on his friend's personality. Later, during a meal, Yuan reprimanded Slight for his impulsive behavior. The blonde, full of regret, apologized, insisting that he could control the sword. Dooko Yan interrupted their argument, reminding them of Professor Yumina's warning. If they continued to display so much power so openly, the hostility from the other students would only intensify. She then turned to Yuan. As the class representative, she asked him what his plan was. Yuan thought for a moment. The root of the problem was the academy system, which was built on prejudice and birth status. He asked the group what it took to win the favor of the masses. They suggested power. Yuan smiled and said it was something else, something they already had. He made a square with his fingers, imitating a camera. The plan was simple yet brilliant. They would create a channel on UnionTuber to showcase their daily activities, build a positive public image, and change the perception that the rest of the academy had of them. Their first recording was a training fight between Dooko Yan and a reluctant Slight. To force him to fight seriously, Dooko Yan attacked him for real, throwing him to the ground and taunting him until he finally fought back with everything he had. While filming the spectacular battle, Yuan explained to a worried Rachel that showing their true skills was the best way to intimidate any future aggressors. The channel was an instant and explosive success. The fight video went viral, and other videos showing the group in more casual moments, like playing games, having tea with Professor Yamina, or Rachel making funny faces while trying new foods, completely won over the audience. They became the biggest celebrities in the academy. Their next step was to livestream their first climb up the tower. On the scheduled day, a large crowd gathered to see them off. Professor Yamina praised their initiative as the group prepared to enter. Yuan, still in his school uniform, stood out from the others, who were all clad in combat gear. With a look of conviction, he straightened his tie, stating that his uniform was all he needed. Yamina teleported them to the tower's entrance, where they were met with more stares, this time of admiration and curiosity. Yuan announced that they would be staying for 3 days and 2 nights, and with a small, floating camera recording their every move, he led his team into the biggest challenge of their lives, wishing his ancestors could see him now. Inside the tower, the rules of reality were different. As Professor Yamina had explained in a previous meeting, the floors or rooms were constantly changing their layouts. Death wasn't permanent. Defeat usually meant being teleported back to the entrance, with the student pendant allowing them to return to the point where they were defeated. However, she had admitted that there were certain areas where death was, in fact, final. On the first floor, they were confronted by claw slithers, slimy monsters that were easily dispatched by Slight and Dooko Yan. Meanwhile, Yuan was trying to extract the concept of fire from a nearby torch, but to his surprise, his power didn't work. Distracted, he was almost attacked, but Eve protected him, transforming into a chain of sharp spikes. It was then that Rachel sprang into action, revealing a wild side with glowing red eyes and sharp claws, tearing the creatures apart with a startling ferocity. Dooko Yan sensed a more powerful energy gathering nearby and alerted the group. Yuan used his eyes and saw an obelisk forming a summoning circle. He ordered Rachel to destroy it immediately. With a devastating blow, she shattered the obelisk just before an elite monster could appear, obtaining its core as a reward. At that moment, Slight noticed something strange. Rachel's hair, once a light pink, now had multicolored streaks. Yuan explained that this was a manifestation of Rachel's furnace heart concept, which burned her emotions to generate power. Worried, the girl asked if she had been scary. Dooko Yan, with her usual coldness, replied that if she lost control, she would stop her herself, which only made Rachel more uneasy. Yuan intervened, promising to help her control her power, and the group was transported to the second floor. The new environment was a vast, green field. Yuan took the opportunity to analyze the core Rachel had obtained, learning the concepts of acid and fusion. He fed the acid concept to Eve and infused the fusion concept into his own weapon. Soon, monsters in the form of evil spirits began to appear. Dooko Yan destroyed one with a blast of energy and then provocatively suggested that Yuan should take care of the entire floor by himself to accelerate his growth. After a moment of hesitation, he accepted the challenge. Stretching his arms, he summoned Eve, who, upon passing through a magic circle, transformed into a massive firearm. With a simple command, the weapon began to unleash continuous barrages of energy, annihilating the spirits in seconds. Slight watched in shock, wishing his own kingdom had access to such firepower. Dooko Yan, though impressed, noted a flaw in the weapon. It was useless in close-quarters combat. As if to prove her point, a spirit silently slithered up behind Yuan, its gigantic mouth opening wide, ready to swallow him whole. His friends screamed a warning. The protagonist, alerted by their reaction, turned around just in time to come face to face with the abyss of the monster's jaws. Ignoring his friends' panicked shouts, Yuan calmly made a sword appear out of thin air and faced the evil spirit. With a single, clean vertical slash, he dispatched the monster that had tried to ambush him. His two companions, who had been holding their breath, finally let out a sigh of relief. Slight, however, was left with his jaw on the floor, completely stunned to see Yuan wielding a sword. After all, he himself had spent considerable time strengthening his own blade with various attributes in preparation for serious battles. As for Rachel, she had no idea Yuan even knew how to handle a sword. He humbly explained that he was still far from being as skilled as Slight or Dooko Yan. Hearing this, Dooko Yan smiled, finding his humility well-placed and feeling a sense of pride in his rapid improvement. But Yuan didn't stop there. He pressed forward, seamlessly alternating between shots from his firearm and swift strikes with his sword, methodically destroying every spirit that appeared in his path. The monsters kept coming, only to be defeated one by one. He was now not only using Eve but also brandishing his sword with impressive skill, each move a testament to everything he had learned so far. With a smile, he commented that even though he wasn't the best, he was striving to evolve with every fight. After finishing off the majority of the spirits, he rested his sword on the ground and sighed, feeling the fatigue set in. He looked at the others and announced that there were no more enemies nearby, only the last one remained. With that, he summoned Eve and transformed her into a chain, ordering her to bind the final spirit. With the monster immobilized, he told them they could take a short break before finishing the job. While they caught their breath, Dooko Yan bent down and touched the remains of one of the defeated spirits. She noticed something interesting. The edge of Yuan's sword had melted and disintegrated the monsters. She quickly deduced that he was already putting the abilities he had acquired on the previous floor to use. Slight also couldn't hide his surprise at what he was seeing. Dooko Yan, for her part, didn't hold back her praise, telling him his last attack had been excellent. She began to think out loud, commenting that his fighting style was much more strategic than just swinging a sword around aimlessly. Slight bristled at the comment, asking why she always treated him like an amateur. In the midst of their bickering, Yuan reached into his inventory and pulled out a cold can of energy drink. He cracked it open and started drinking calmly, chuckling at his two friends' squabble. Seeing this, all three of his companions glared at him, all of them angry and curious about what he was drinking, and of course, wanting a taste. He just pointed at the can and said he didn't have any more, casually mentioning that this type of drink could be bought outside the academy. No one believed his excuse since, unlike him, none of them could simply leave to go shopping. Annoyed, he put the can back in his inventory, grumbling that he would only use it again when he was truly exhausted. This comment caught Dooko Yan's attention, and she decided to take the lead from that point on. Realizing that everyone had rested enough, Yuan quickly destroyed the last monster. At that exact moment, a magic circle appeared beneath each of their feet, and they were transported to the next room. As the world dissolved around him, Yuan closed his eyes. He wanted to check his own attributes. A window appeared in his mind, displaying more than 10 different attributes. He was thrilled with his progress. His score was now at the average level for an academy student. However, he knew that to become more efficient, he needed to focus on strengthening his swordsman skills. The difference in strength between him and Erector was about 200 points, a gap he couldn't possibly close in just a weekend. But since he was learning martial arts from Dooko Yan, he thought he might have found a way. He knew it wasn't enough to simply acquire skills. He had to evolve them. He considered asking his classmate for more lessons but quickly dismissed the idea, not wanting to be a burden. While he was racking his brain, trying to figure out a path to greater strength, he was hit by several gusts of wind. He was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't even notice the immediate danger. For a moment, he thought he was simply being transported to the next room. It was only when he heard Slight shouting his name that he snapped back to reality. He opened his eyes and realized the horrifying situation they were in. The four of them were in a freefall, the wind whistling past them. He looked down, trying to understand why they were plummeting from the sky. Rachel seemed even more desperate, flailing against gravity and trying to hold down her skirt. He looked down again, still completely bewildered, but this time he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The ground below was a forest of sharp, upturned spears. Thinking fast, he summoned Eve, who immediately transformed into a chain. With a precise flick of his wrist, the chain wrapped around Rachel, saving her from being impaled by a hair's breadth. He let out a sigh of relief, holding onto the chain with all his might. But he knew there had to be a trap at the transition point. As he tried to make sense of the situation, he heard someone call his name. Looking up, he saw Dooko Yan, somehow stuck upside down to the ceiling. Her warning was clear, he needed to move and fast. But he froze for a second, shocked at the sight of her hanging there. Just as she finished her warning, he heard a loud grinding noise. One of the walls was opening, unleashing a shower of spears directly at him. Terrified, he knew he couldn't let go of the chain holding Rachel. Without a second's hesitation, he gave the chain a powerful tug, flinging her upwards. At the same time, he summoned Lilith, his flying motorcycle, while still controlling Eve. Rachel screamed in fear from the sudden pull, but the angle was perfect, allowing the spears to fly right past her. Yuan's quick thinking caused the volley of spears to crash into each other. As she began to fall again, he was already there, catching her in his arms. She blushed at the sudden closeness as he asked if she was okay. They were now both safely on the hoverbike. He apologized for the rough pull, explaining that the situation was dire and he had no other choice. As he spoke, more traps began to activate all around them. He just smiled and skillfully began to dodge the axes flying towards them, shattering them before they could get close. Suddenly, it was clear that Slight was different. He now had 2 pairs of draconic wings sprouting from his back. With his divine sword in hand, he floated among the remnants of the destroyed axes, wondering what was going on. He remembered the professor's briefing. She had said that traps would only start appearing after room 20, but they were only in the 3rd room, and the difficulty was already this high. Flapping his wings to stay airborne, Slight spotted the flying motorcycle zipping through the room and wondered when his friend had acquired such an item. Yuan, piloting the motorcycle, was getting annoyed. He sped up, weaving through the traps that were appearing at every turn. Behind him, Rachel was still replaying the moment he had held her in his arms. Now smiling, she hugged his back, feeling much more comfortable with the situation. Surprised by the sudden hug, Yuan got distracted for a second, just long enough for an arrow to strike the motorcycle. He started weaving between the room's columns, trying to dodge the projectiles being launched at them. The danger was getting closer and closer until a slash of golden light intercepted a volley of spears. Yuan stopped the motorcycle and, looking to the side, saw Slight floating in the air. He wanted to know why his friend was just standing there watching. Looking closer at Slight's appearance, Yuan was surprised and asked about the wings. But the blonde had a question of his own, pointing to the motorcycle. He wanted to know where it had come from, commenting that it looked like an item from Yuan's world. Yuan then asked about Dooko Yan, worried she might have fallen into a trap. But the situation was quite the opposite. She was moving with incredible agility along the tower's walls. Yuan didn't know her exact location, but he trusted that she was more than capable of handling such an easy trap. And he was right. The young woman was dodging the spears like a seasoned professional, her movements quick and precise, always keeping an eye on her surroundings. Now that he wasn't worried about her safety, Slight asked what their plan was. He remembered the manual stating they should. Yuan interrupted him, asking Slight to fly to the other side of the room so he could analyze the pattern of the traps. As Slight flew across the room, Yuan watched closely and noticed something crucial. All the traps were targeting a single person. Slight clicked. The traps were likely targeting whoever was in motion. He remembered the situation with his classmate at the beginning and finally understood. They needed to avoid moving carelessly in this room. Yuan put his hands on his head, frustrated that he hadn't figured it out sooner. Meanwhile, Dooko Yan was trying to warn him about another arrow heading his way. The arrow struck the floating motorcycle. Annoyed, Yuan pulled it out and held it tightly. He needed to warn the others to stop moving, but if they did that, how would they clear the level? Holding the arrow tighter, he finally noticed something. A reaction was happening. Looking closely, he saw that the arrow was being absorbed into his hand. This was new. Since the first room, he had been trying to absorb concepts, but it had never worked. Now he looked at his sword. Could his hunch be right? He wouldn't know unless he tried. He decided to grab the sword. Dooko Yan, not understanding his actions, just watched. Before her eyes, he started absorbing the sword itself, and both she and Rachel were shocked. After the sword dissolved into golden dust in his hand, he received a concept, but it wasn't what he expected. Instead of sword, he received the concept of cutting, which reminded him of the thrusting technique Dooko Yan had been teaching him. While he was pondering this, Rachel called out to him, asking him to look in a certain direction. When he looked, he saw Slight surfing on a wave of traps. After escaping the wave, completely annoyed, he leaned on his sword. It had all happened because he had let his guard down, thinking that only the weapons were dangerous. After falling into the trap, Slight's vision began to blur, and he realized he could barely defend himself against the dozens of new traps that were now appearing. At that moment, Yuan didn't just stand by. He was on Lilith, his glider motorcycle, and had to leave Rachel behind to go and help Slight. He had already apologized to her before leaving, and she understood that he didn't want her to get involved. As Yuan sped over the waves of traps hitting his friend, he gained more points in his water concept. Everything happened as he had expected. What touched him was water, but he received the concept of waves. Finally, he was beginning to understand how his power worked and why he hadn't received the sword concept earlier. As he advanced on the motorcycle, Dooko Yan was jumping from pillar to pillar, analyzing the situation. She was surprised to look down and see Yuan on the motorcycle with waves of energy emanating from its sides. He was heading towards Slight because he had realized that the state of a substance at the moment it manifested determined the concept he acquired. Just like the trap that had aimed for his neck earlier had given him the concept of beheading. With that in mind, he advanced towards the activated arrows and spears, all of them aimed at Slight. He shouted to Slight, telling him he would handle the situation, and sped up. It was at this moment that he hoped his all-seeing eye ability would deepen. The arrows were getting closer and closer to Slight, who was screaming for help. Yuan closed his eyes, stretched out his hands towards the weapons, and activated his power. When he opened his eyes again, a written word appeared on the tip of each blade, a concept he could now understand. The intent of each weapon was revealed, and now they were all aimed at him. Slight was in disbelief at what had just happened. He was saved. However, Yuan was now the target of all those weapons. He grabbed one of them, but he didn't want to take them one by one, afraid that the concepts would mix and lose their essence. So, he released a huge amount of energy, connecting the concept in his hand to all the other concepts of the weapons. When he finished the process, an intense golden glow erupted and surrounded him. The plan to infuse the concepts had been a success.